1.2 million. That's the number of China-made new energy vehicles or NEVs exported in 2023. And Chinese carmaker BYD has been reported to have surpassed Tesla in the fourth quarter of last year to become the world's top pure electric vehicle maker. The rapid growth of NEVs helped propel China to the position of world number one last year in car making, exporting a total of 5.2 million cars. Now, from just exporting 70,000 NEVs in 2020 to 1.2 million last year, that's a 17-fold boom in 3 years. What caused the acceleration of Chinese NEVs? How will it upend the global auto industry? I'm pleased to be joined from Amherst, Massachusetts in the US by independent analyst Xing Lei, co-host of the podcast China's EVs and More, and from San Francisco by Professor Daniel Kammen, the James and Catherine Lau Distinguished Professor of Sustainability at the University of California, Berkeley, also a former science envoy in the Obama administration. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So let's take a look at some numbers here. According to the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, in 2020, exports of electric vehicles from China were only 70,000 units, and the number rose to 310,000 in 2021, and then to 680,000 in 2022, and now 1.2 million last year. That's 17 times in 3 years. Mr. Xing, let me go to you first. What gives to the huge boom that China's NEVs have experienced?
First of all, thank you for having me, and nice to be back. Well, this is well documented, I think, over the past 3 or 4 years during the pandemic, that seemingly China's NEVs took over the world. But in fact, I think this is 15 years in the making. So when the last round of gushing growth for China auto sales, right after the global financial crisis in 2009 and 2010, something else was set in motion, which is the 10-city 1,000 NEV program that tried to electrify the fleets in China. And it's been 15 years of building the infrastructure, building the supply chain, and during the pandemic. So 3 words would probably describe the reasons behind this gush in NEV export: availability, affordability, and quality. And one of the bigger reasons is China's manufacturing, especially automotive factoring, stayed on while other parts of the world faced issues in manufacturing. So China had the availability, and let's say markets like Europe, other parts of the world, they had the demand, but not the manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that those are, the historical aspect of it, and kind of the pandemic, the shortages and the manufacturing. I think those are reasons behind this boom.
Okay, let's talk about some of the factors in just a moment. Let me go to Professor Kammen. How do you look at the reasons, the possible factors behind the boom, especially over the last 3 years? Actually, especially during the last year, according to the same organization, Chinese companies, the leading Chinese companies, for instance, BYD, they exported 250,000 vehicles. That's up 3 times year on year. Great Wall NEV export last year were also 80% year on year increase. What explains for the sudden boom in these numbers?
Well, I think you just heard it's really not a sudden boom. I mean, this is definitely a decade and a half long increase. And it's really heartening to see, because the global electric vehicle market can absorb a great many vehicles. We need to do a number of things. And the more competitive companies, I mean, you heard price, quality, and production volume in the previous answer. And that's really what we need from a whole range of winners. Early on, when it seemed like Tesla was the only player, That might have been interesting to get markets going in certain parts of the world, but ultimately we need a diverse, competitive industry. And I think what we're seeing now is different segments emerging. So you mentioned the BYD numbers, and that 250,000 exports is important, but we also can look at companies like VinFast from Vietnam, which is opening up a manufacturing plant in North Carolina. That single plant will produce 250,000 vehicles a year, and that's just one new company that many people view as an upstart. And so what we're going to need to see to really accelerate decarbonization is many players in many different price points. And I think that one of the areas where we've seen not only Chinese companies, but also some Indian car companies, they see the low cost $8,000 to $10,000 to $12,000 town car as a very competitive market, because ultimately we need to not just go further on electricity, but also we need to decarbonize it. And so all of those features are critical, and it's really nice to see the role that China is playing.
Mr. Xing, let me come back to you. You talked about 15 years. China released a plan that's called the 863 plan, which a lot of people attribute to kind of setting the policy foundation for the booming of the NEV sector. Now, if you were asked this question, what is the most important factor behind the boom of Chinese NEV industry? What would you put your finger on?
Well, I think it's the top-down approach of having this national policy framework. Subsidies is one example that started in 2014 and ended in 2022, which really drove the sales of NEVs, and then also electrifying, the fleets, so public transport. So quite a few cities in China, where public transport and taxis are already fully electric. There's no more ICEs. And so I think this top-down framework that China had, I think that's the biggest reason to me.
How big is the role of subsidy? Because it's a very sensitive issue here. The EU has accused Chinese car makers or Chinese government of unfairly subsidizing Chinese car makers. Therefore, they have launched an investigation. Are you saying they are right?
Well, so there's subsidies to the consumers and there's subsidies to the manufacturers. The EU Commission investigation currently, right now, I believe on BYD, Geely, and SAIC Motor are more on the manufacturing side of it. So it's more of unfair competition. But obviously, Europe, they also provide subsidies to all the EVs, including the Chinese EVs, to consumers.
Professor Kammen, how do you look at the implication of the large number of Chinese-made affordable and quality NEVs hitting overseas markets? You're seeing the latest cover of The Economist magazine as if Chinese NEVs are hitting the world like meteorites, and the title is like terrifying. What is your view of the kind of impact, both positive and possibly negative as well?
Yeah, well, I guess I don't see it as a particularly significant feature in terms of some earthquake or tidal wave. I mean,
but the picture, yeah. What do you think of the cover picture? Because these are like really strong impacts that they are perceiving or they are depicting.
I understand. Let me finish my answer.
Yeah, please.
Right. Okay. So as we both talked about in answers before, this has been a steady and a thoughtfully developed operation, and with many companies and countries in the US, in Europe, in Korea, Japan, all setting high levels of targets for electric vehicle use. Everyone needs the manufacturing capacity, and China is a dramatic leader in that. So I don't think that, The Economist likes to have flashy titles. I don't view this as a particularly watershed moment. What I do think is important, though, is that electric vehicles are only as green as the power to power them itself is green. And so we see, for example, places that are very coal dependent, whether it is in Shaanxi province in China or in West Virginia in the United States or in Poland. That electric vehicle is an improvement, but not a huge improvement over gas vehicles. But in places that are very green, such as part of the southern grid in China, California, in the Nordic states, that electric vehicle can be 2 to 3 to 4 times greener than a gas-powered car. And as the grid gets cleaner and as we get more charging infrastructure, it's a bigger and bigger part of the green energy story. So I think what The Economist is likely to do next is really to highlight the role of electrification of transportation, not just individual vehicles, but as the other guest highlighted, the fleets. And in fact, I work in Guangzhou province where they installed 13,000 electric buses. We see full electrification of the electric vehicle taxi fleet in Shenzhen, other places. Those are really the critical levers where policy, subsidy, infrastructure all come together. And I think what The Economist is likely to do next is something about how clean transportation looked difficult 10 years ago. Now it actually looks like it's really just a function of integration of infrastructure. And that's something that many countries, Germany, China, US, are actually quite good at. So all of this is needed. We actually have to accelerate the introduction, not see it as a battle.
Absolutely, I agree. Mr. Xing, what kind of efforts are being put in by Chinese NEV makers to make sure that they are pushing for the green initiative, both in the production and in the consumption of it?
Well, I think this is something that will be scrutinized a lot because when we talk about NEVs, we have to talk about the upstream critical raw materials, which currently China dominates, right? But how you source those materials, how you refine, how you process, I think this will be scrutinized. But I think the Chinese companies are well aware of that, and this is a lot of the what's going on. I'm here in the U.S. What's going on is with the IRA is trying to erase China from that equation, but I think it's very difficult because China owns so much of the upstream material in its supply chain. But I think efforts are being made on the Chinese part to be whether it's ESG, whether it's green sourcing, that type of thing that this will be something that even the battery cell manufacturers, they will make an effort to improve.
Well, definitely, this is not a static development. The Chinese companies will continue to forge ahead and make sure that their green cars are really bringing a green impact to the environment where they're used. We have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Many thanks to my guest, Mr. Xing Lei, co-host of the podcast China EVs and More, and Professor Daniel Kammen from the University of California, Berkeley. Thank you very much for joining us. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.